Rachel Doyle Monroe was 41 years old, and she had spent the last 10 of those years keeping her father alive one Tuesday appointment at a time. She owned a small bakery on Main Street in Millhaven, Ohio, a fading steel town 2 hours south of Cleveland, the kind of place where everyone still waved from their porches and everyone still remembered whose father worked which shift at the plant before it shut down. Doyle's, the sign out front said, half named after her family, half named after the only thing that had kept her sane during the years she spent driving her father to Cedar Grove Senior Living 3 times a week. She opened at 5 every morning. She closed the register herself every night. In between, she'd learned to run a business, bury a mother, and slowly lose a father to a mind that stopped trusting its own memory. Her brother, Daniel, was 38, a regional sales manager who lived 40 minutes away and visited 4 times in 10 years. She was still wearing her funeral dress when she found out none of it had mattered. The lawyer's office was small and overheated, the radiator clanking behind a desk covered in diplomas that all seemed a little crooked. Rachel sat with her hands folded the way her mother taught her to sit in church, waiting for the part of the sentence where her name came in, the part that made sense of a decade of grocery runs and midnight fevers and nights spent on a fold-out cot beside her father's hospital bed because he was scared of the dark and wouldn't say so out loud. The entirety of the estate, the attorney said, the property at 214 Elm Ridge Drive, liquid assets totaling approximately $340,000, and the Doyle Restoration Workshop, is bequeathed to Daniel Walter Doyle. There were no more sentences. And to Rachel Doyle Monroe, he continued, not quite meeting her eyes, her father's Zippo lighter collection. Valued at approximately $400. Across the table, Daniel's face did something only Rachel caught, a flicker, half a second of this actually worked, before it disappeared under the wounded, grieving expression he'd been perfecting his whole life. Rach. I swear to God, I had no idea. She didn't answer right away. She was doing math in her head. The kind of math that makes your stomach drop straight through the floor. When was this signed? The lawyer, Grant Whitfield, checked the folder. September 14th. The room tilted. September 14th was a Tuesday. Rachel remembered it exactly, because she had driven her father to Cedar Grove that morning for a hearing aid adjustment, and by that afternoon, back home, he didn't remember they'd gone anywhere at all. He'd asked her twice, that same day, where her mother was. Their mother had been dead for 6 years. That's not possible, Rachel said, her voice quiet but steady. He didn't know what day it was that whole week. You're telling me he signed away everything the same afternoon he couldn't remember eating breakfast? Nobody in that room had an answer. Not the lawyer. Not Daniel. Whitfield cleared his throat, the throat clear of a man who badly wanted this meeting over. The document was notarized. His physician signed off on capacity at the time. Which physician? I'd have to check the file. Rachel filed that away without a word. 10 years of caregiving had taught her to notice the small things, the tremor in a hand before a bad day, the silence before a scared man tried to hide his fear, and every instinct she had was screaming that something here was wrong. Daniel reached across the table, like he might take her hand. She pulled it back before he got there. I know how this looks, he said. But Dad and I talked. Before things got bad. He said he wanted to make it right by me. I wasn't around like you were, and I think that ate at him. Then why didn't he tell me? Silence. A long, ugly silence that filled the whole overheated little room, and somewhere underneath it, Rachel understood that whatever her brother thought he'd gotten away with, the truth hadn't finished with him yet. If you've ever watched someone you loved turn into a stranger in a single sentence, if you know what it's like for grief and betrayal to hit at the exact same moment, then you already understand why stories like this one are so hard to walk away from. This is only the first crack in something much bigger, and I promise you the next part is nothing like what you're expecting. Subscribe to Calm Stories Drama right now, because Rachel's story is only just beginning. The reception afterward filled her father's kitchen with casseroles and murmured condolences she barely absorbed. Someone had brought the good coffee urn from the Lutheran church down the road, the one that only came out for funerals, and the smell of it turned Rachel's stomach the moment she walked in. She found herself in the garage without remembering how she got there. Her father's workshop. Every tool hung exactly where he'd left it, labeled in his own crooked handwriting on strips of masking tape gone yellow with age. On the workbench sat a half-sanded cast-iron toy truck under a drop cloth he'd never gotten around to removing, the last restoration project of a man who spent 30 years fixing other people's broken things for almost nothing, because he liked the work more than the money. He'd have hated all those casseroles, said a voice behind her. Ellen Reyes stood in the doorway. 70 years old, sharp as a blade, a paper plate of ham sandwiches balanced in one hand. She'd lived next door to the Doyles for 31 years, long enough to have been at both siblings' weddings, long enough to be the closest thing to family that wasn't blood. He'd have hated the whole day, Rachel said, and her voice cracked on the last word. She hated that it did. Ellen crossed the garage and set a firm hand on Rachel's shoulder. I need to tell you something, she said. And I need you to not say a word until I'm finished, because if I stop, I might lose my nerve. Rachel turned to face her. Your father sat right at my kitchen table last winter and told me exactly how he wanted things split when he was gone. Even 50-50. He said Daniel would probably need the money more, but that wasn't the point. He said fair was fair, and you'd earned your half twice over, taking care of him the way you did. Rachel's breath caught somewhere behind her ribs. Why didn't you say anything at the reading? Because I thought that's what the will said. Ellen's jaw tightened with something close to shame. I found out an hour ago it isn't. Not even close. She reached into the oversized handbag she'd carried since Rachel was in high school and pulled out a folded piece of paper, soft at the creases from being read too many times. He wrote it down, Ellen said. In case anything ever happened before he got it fixed proper with Whitfield's office. Rachel's hand shook as she unfolded it. Her father's handwriting, that same left-leaning scrawl that used to sign her school permission slips, that wrote happy birthday, peanut on every card since she was 6 years old, filled the page. It was dated 14 months before his death. If anything happens to me before I get this fixed proper, I want it known, everything split even between Rachel and Daniel. No arguments. She earned it. He needs to learn to stand on his own, and giving him everything now won't teach him that. Love you both. Don't let this tear you apart. Dad. Rachel read it 3 times. Somewhere in the house behind her, she could hear Daniel's easy laugh carrying through the kitchen, accepting condolences, playing the grieving son, standing in the house their father built like he already owned every inch of it. She folded the letter carefully and slid it into her pocket, and for the first time since the will was read, something in her chest steadied. She had no idea yet how far this would go, or how much it would cost her to find out the truth. But she knew one thing, standing in that garage with her father's tools hanging silent around her. Whatever Daniel thought was already settled, he had no idea it was only just beginning. Grant Whitfield's office looked smaller in daylight than it had during the will reading. The overhead fluorescence made everything look tired, the diplomas on the wall, the stacks of manila folders, even Whitfield himself, who sat across from Rachel now with his tie loosened and his reading glasses pushed up into thinning gray hair. Rachel set Ellen's letter on the desk between them, sealed inside a plastic sleeve, like it was already evidence in a case that didn't officially exist yet. I'm not saying it isn't concerning, Whitfield said, choosing every word like he was crossing thin ice. I'm saying a handwritten note from over a year ago doesn't override a notarized legal will. Legally, it doesn't carry the same weight. But you noticed something. Rachel leaned forward. At the reading. I saw your face when you read out the date. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled a second document from his drawer, the property deed on the Elm Ridge house, signed by Walter years earlier, and slid it beside the new will so the 2 signatures sat side by side. Tell me what you see, he said. Rachel leaned in. Her father's old signature was loose and looping, confident, the hand of a machinist who'd signed 1,000 work orders without a second thought. The signature on the new will was different. Tighter. Slower. The letters crowded too close together, like someone concentrating hard on getting each stroke right, the way a child does when they're first learning cursive. "It's shaky," she said. "It's shaky," Whitfield agreed, and something in his voice had gone heavy. "I noted it at the time. I let it go, because his notary and his physician both signed off on his mental capacity that day. I should have asked more questions. I'll own that." "Who was the notary?" He checked the file. "Marisol Vega. Provides notary services out of Cedar Grove." Rachel wrote the name down on the legal pad she'd started carrying everywhere, right underneath the date, September 14th, and underneath that, in smaller letters, the words he couldn't remember: breakfast. Cedar Grove smelled exactly the way it always had, antiseptic layered over burnt coffee, a smell Rachel would recognize blindfolded after 200 visits over 8 months. The front desk clerk, a tired young woman with a coffee stain on her lapel, didn't recognize Rachel at first. Then she did, and her expression went careful in a way that told Rachel everything she needed to know about how fast gossip moved through this building. "I'm requesting visitor logs," Rachel said. "For my father. Walter Doyle. He has been here for 8 months. That'd need to go through administration. I'm putting the request in today. I just want to understand his last few months." Rachel kept her voice soft, the same tone she used to use talking her father down from a bad afternoon. "That's all this is." The clerk's eyes flicked toward a hallway before coming back. "You could talk to Marisol. She did a lot of the paperwork for your dad's floor. She might remember things that never made it into a log." "Is she in today?" "Not Wednesdays. She runs a notary desk out of the strip mall on Route 9, next to the nail place." Marisol Vega worked behind a folding table wedged between a nail salon and a check-cashing storefront, a laminated sign above her reading notary services, "Walk INS Welcome." She was maybe 33, with the kind of exhaustion in her face that comes from more than just work, the exhaustion of someone carrying something heavy and hoping no one asks about it. The moment Rachel said the name Doyle, something in Marisol's expression shut like a door slamming. "I don't have anything to say about that file. I haven't asked anything yet. I know why you're here." Marisol's hands were folded so tight her knuckles had gone pale. "I did my job. I notarized a document. That's it. That's all I do." "My father couldn't remember what year it was, some days that month," Rachel said quietly. "I'm not here to get you in trouble. I just want to understand, when you notarized that will, did he seem like himself? Was he lucid?" For just a second, one single second, something flickered behind Marisol's eyes. Guilt. Fear. Rachel had spent a decade reading faces for the truth hiding underneath what people said out loud, and she recognized both immediately. "I need you to leave," Marisol said. "Please." Rachel left her card on the folding table anyway, weighted down under a stapler so it wouldn't blow away. She didn't expect a call. She was wrong about that. But not yet, and not in the way she was hoping for. 2 days later, the bell over the bakery door jingled at 2 in the afternoon, right in the dead stretch between lunch rush and the after-school crowd, and Daniel walked in still wearing his work clothes, his tie loosened like he'd driven straight from the office without stopping. "You went to Cedar Grove," he said. "No hello." "No, how are you holding up?" Rachel kept wiping down the display case. "I did." "You talked to some notary." "How do you know that?" His jaw worked, and for the first time since the will reading, the easy charm cracked, just enough for Rachel to catch a glimpse of something underneath it. Something scared, dressed up as anger, the way it always had been when they were kids and he'd gotten caught doing something he shouldn't have. "You're going to blow this whole family up over a piece of paper Ellen probably misremembers," he said, and his voice climbed faster than he seemed to want it to. "You have no idea what I'm carrying right now." "None." "You want to drag this into court? Turn it into a spectacle the whole town whispers about at the diner? Then tell me what you're carrying." He caught himself. She watched him physically rebuild the mask in real time, shoulders dropping back into their casual slouch, the easy half-smile sliding back into place like a light switch flipping on. "Forget it," he said. Forget I said anything. I just need you to let this go, Rach. For the family. Please. He left before she could answer. Through the front window she watched him sit in his car in the parking lot for a long time, both hands gripped white-knuckled around the wheel, before he finally pulled away. What are you carrying, Daniel? Here's a question I keep coming back to, and I want to hear what you think in the comments below. If you found out someone you loved had lied to you, not out of cruelty, but out of pure, cornered desperation, would that change how you judged them? Could you separate the reason from the act? I think Rachel's about to find out the hard way exactly what her answer is, and I think you might surprise yourself with what yours turns out to be too. If you're invested in where this goes, make sure you're subscribed to Calm Stories Drama, because the story is going to hit harder than anything so far now. The answer came from an unlikely source 3 days later. Tommy Briggs, an old friend of Daniel's from Millhaven High, 20 years back, stopped into the bakery for a coffee, and somewhere between his second refill and a little too much comfort in the empty shop, he said something Rachel could tell he immediately regretted. Is Danny doing okay? I heard he had some trouble with the guy from the card games out on Route 40. Heard it got ugly out there. Rachel kept her face perfectly still, the same neutral mask she'd learned to hold at 100 hospital bedsides over the years. What kind of trouble? Tommy's expression shifted the second the words left his mouth. Nothing. Forget I said that. Probably nothing. It wasn't nothing. A public records search that night, plus one favor from a cousin who worked downtown at the county courthouse, turned up 2 liens filed against Daniel's car, a maxed-out line of credit stretching back over a year, and quiet talk from a mutual acquaintance about a high-stakes card game running out of the back room of a bar off Route 40. A game Daniel had reportedly been in deep with for months. It wasn't proof of fraud. Rachel understood that. A gambling debt didn't prove a forged signature, didn't prove a stolen inheritance, didn't prove anything a courtroom would actually accept. But it was a motive. A real one. Not cartoon greed, a man drowning, grabbing for the fastest rope within reach, and finding his father's estate hanging right there in front of him at exactly the moment he needed it most. Marisol called 2 nights later, close to 11, her voice low and pressed thin, like she was speaking from somewhere she wasn't supposed to be overheard. I can't keep doing this, she said. I can't keep pretending I don't know anything. Then don't, Rachel said gently, sitting down slowly at her kitchen table like any sudden movement might scare the confession off. Tell me what you know. Off the record, if that's what you need. A long silence stretched between them. In the background, faintly, Rachel could hear a child's cartoon playing, a reminder that whatever Marisol had done, she hadn't done it for nothing. People rarely did the wrong thing without a reason underneath it. Your father didn't sign that will the way it says he did, Marisol whispered. He was there, at Cedar Grove, that afternoon. But he didn't understand what he was signing. Daniel told me he had power of attorney. Told me it was just a formality to speed things up because your dad got confused by paperwork. Did he have power of attorney? Silence. Marisol. No, she breathed, and her voice cracked wide open. And I knew that when I stamped it. Daniel offered me $2,000, and I had a hospital bill for my son I didn't know how I was going to pay, and I told myself it was small, that it didn't hurt anybody. Rachel closed her eyes. Relief and grief tangled together so tightly in her chest it was hard to breathe. I'll testify, Marisol said. I have to make this right. We can go to Whitfield tomorrow, first thing. Wait. Her voice snapped suddenly into panic. Someone's calling, a number I don't recognize. It's too late for anyone to be calling me. Marisol, wait. I'll call you back. She didn't call back that night. She didn't answer the next morning. 3 days of silence later, when Rachel finally got her on the line, Marisol's voice had gone flat and rehearsed, terrified in a completely different way than before. I don't know what you think I told you, she said. I don't have anything to say. Please don't contact me again. The line went dead. Rachel stood in her kitchen holding the phone, the dial tone humming in her ear like an alarm she couldn't shut off, and understood with sick, sudden clarity, someone had gotten to Marisol first. And whatever thin thread of justice she'd spent 2 weeks building had just been cut clean, deliberately, at the exact moment she needed it most. Rachel didn't sleep that night. She sat alone at her father's kitchen table, hers now, technically, though it still felt borrowed, like she was trespassing in her own life, surrounded by Ellen's letter, a stack of visitor logs she'd finally pried loose from Cedar Grove's administration office, and a legal pad so covered in circled dates that the ink had started bleeding through to the next page. Something was missing. She could feel it the way she used to feel a bad night coming with her father, a rawness in the air before it ever showed its face. 2 a.m. came and went. The house creaked around her, empty in a way it had never been empty before, not even after her mother died, because at least then there had still been her father breathing in the next room. That's when she remembered the journal. 10 years of entries. Moods, meals, medications, good days and bad ones, logged religiously so she wouldn't lose her mind trying to track the slow unraveling of a man who used to be able to rebuild an engine blindfolded. She hadn't opened it since the funeral. She hadn't been able to. She pulled the cardboard box down from the hall closet, dust catching in the kitchen light, and dug until her fingers found the worn spiral binding. She opened it in September. September 14th. Dad was rough today. Didn't recognize the kitchen for a minute when we got back from Cedar Grove, thought we were at the old house on Maple. Asked about Mom twice. I made him grilled cheese, and only ate half. Fell asleep in his chair by 6. Sat with him till 9. I took a picture of him sleeping because it scared me how peaceful he looked, wanted to remember it. Taped into the margin of the page was a photo she'd printed at the drugstore years ago and never thought about again, her father asleep in his recliner, the old Steelers blanket pulled over his knees. In the corner, faint but legible, a timestamp printed by the machine at the pharmacy counter. 9:47 p.m., September 14th. Rachel's hands went cold. The notarized will, the document that claimed to represent her father's clear, competent final wishes, was timestamped 4:15 p.m. that same afternoon, at Cedar Grove Senior Living. But at 5 o'clock that evening, Rachel had picked her father up and brought him home. She had been with him from 5 straight through past 9, sitting beside his chair while he slept, watching his chest rise and fall the way she'd been doing for years, terrified every single night that it might be the last time she got to. He hadn't been at Cedar Grove signing anything at 4:15. He'd been asleep in his own house by 6, exactly like he was every Tuesday that fall, and Rachel had the photograph, the timestamp, and 10 years of dated, consistent proof to back it up. It wasn't proof of forgery on its own. She understood that. A broken timeline wasn't a confession. But broken timelines had a habit of pulling everything attached to them down along with them, and this one was about to pull hard. She called Whitfield at 7 the next morning, her voice shaking so badly she had to say her own name twice before he understood her. 3 days later, Whitfield's office held more people than Rachel had expected, and the air in the room felt thick enough to choke on. Ellen sat beside her, arms crossed tight, radiating 70 years of patience that had finally, completely run out. Across the table, Daniel sat next to a young associate lawyer who already looked like he could feel which direction this meeting was heading and didn't like it. Rachel laid everything out on the table, one piece at a time. The journal. The photograph. The timestamp. The impossible gap between where her father actually was that afternoon and where a legal document swore he'd been. Daniel held his composure for almost 2 full minutes. "This doesn't prove anything," he said, his voice tightening. "Memory isn't exact. Photos don't have GPS tags on them. You could be wrong about the day. I have 10 years of entries, Daniel. Every single day. Dated. Consistent. This isn't the one time I got sloppy." Rachel's voice didn't rise, but it didn't waver either. "And I'm not the one you need to convince." The office door opened. Marisol Vega stepped inside, pale, her hands trembling around a folder clutched to her chest. Rachel hadn't known she was coming. hadn't dared to let herself hope. "I have a statement," Marisol said, her voice unsteady but clear enough to carry across the whole room. "I want to give it. On the record." Daniel went completely still. "Marisol. Don't." "I've already lost 2 weeks of sleep over this," she said, not looking at him once. "I'm done losing more." She turned to Whitfield. Walter Doyle was not present at Cedar Grove Senior Living at 4:15 p.m. on September 14. "I notarized a document that day claiming otherwise. Daniel Doyle paid me $2,000 to falsify my log and confirm a signing that didn't happen the way it was recorded. There was no power of attorney on file, because none existed. Daniel told me it was a formality. I believed what I wanted to believe, because I needed the money for my son's medical bills. That was wrong, and I'm ready to face whatever comes from finally saying so." The silence that followed had actual weight to it, pressing down on every person in that room. "You threatened her," Rachel said quietly, turning to look directly at her brother. "That's why she went quiet those 2 weeks." "I didn't threaten anybody," Daniel said, but every trace of his earlier smoothness had drained out of his voice. "I reminded her what she'd be risking too, if this came out." "That's not a threat. That's just true." "It's the same thing, Daniel, when you're the one holding the money, and she's the one holding a kid's hospital bill." Something in him finally broke, right there at that table. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a slow, quiet collapse of the performance he'd been running since the day of the funeral, his shoulders dropping, his hands coming up to cover his face for a long, unbearable moment before he lowered them again. "I owed $41,000, he said, to the table, to no one in particular. To people who don't send letters when you're late paying. I never wanted it to be everything, Rachel. I told myself I'd give you your half once things settled, once I paid off what I owed, that it wasn't really stealing if I meant to fix it eventually. But you didn't fix it. You let 2 weeks go by. You let me believe Dad chose this, that 10 years of my life meant nothing to him." "I know." His voice cracked wide open. "I know what I let you think. I'm sorry." It wasn't a defense. It wasn't even really an excuse. It was just a tired, frightened man finally setting down something heavy he'd been carrying alone for far too long, and for the first time since the will reading, Rachel caught a glimpse of the brother she used to know, buried somewhere underneath the version who'd spent 2 weeks performing composure he didn't feel. She didn't forgive him. Not there. Not yet. But the cold, hard thing lodged behind her ribs since the reading loosened, just slightly, not because he'd earned mercy, but because she finally understood, fully, that this had never been a war between a hero and a villain. It had been 2 grieving people. One of whom made a catastrophic, desperate choice, and now had to live with everything it cost him. The legal process took 6 more weeks. Whitfield, quietly reckoning with his own failure to ask harder questions back in September, pushed the case forward faster than Rachel expected once the pieces were in front of him. The falsified notarization, combined with Marisol's sworn statement and the airtight timeline evidence, was more than enough to have the September will thrown out entirely. Without a valid later document, the estate reverted to Walter's actual last will, drafted years earlier, splitting everything evenly between his 2 children, exactly as Ellen's letter had said from the very beginning. Marisol lost her notary license and paid steep fines, but avoided criminal charges. Her voluntary cooperation weighed heavily in her favor, and so did Rachel's own quiet request to the prosecutor, asking that a struggling single mother not be buried under punishment for a decision made out of desperation over a hospital bill. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly. It was recognizing what desperation does to people, and choosing not to add more of it to a world that already had plenty. Daniel avoided prison too, restitution, community service, a court-mandated debt counseling program. He sold his car to start paying back what he owed. He began attending meetings for the gambling, quietly, telling no one at all, until Rachel found out completely by accident from Tommy Briggs, who mentioned it over coffee like it wasn't a big deal, the way people do when they hand you exactly the piece of information you needed most without realizing it. She didn't see Daniel again for months after the settlement closed. There was still too much sitting between them, not hatred exactly, but something raw that needed time before it could turn into anything else. Then, on a cold Tuesday afternoon in February, he walked back into the bakery. No tie this time. No performance. Just Daniel, in a plain jacket, looking older than she remembered him looking even at the funeral. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," he said. "I just wanted you to know I paid back Marisol's fine. All of it. She didn't ask me to. I just needed to do one thing right." Rachel looked at him for a long moment, weighing it. "That's a start," she said. It wasn't everything. It wasn't the 10 years back, or the 2 weeks of believing her own father hadn't trusted her. But it was a start, and by now, Rachel had learned that starts mattered more than she used to think they did. In March, she and Ellen spent an afternoon in the workshop, finally clearing it out, not erasing it, just making room for it to breathe again. The half-sand cast-iron toy truck still sat on the workbench under its drop cloth, exactly where her father had left it the last day he was well enough to work. Rachel picked it up, turned it over slowly in her hands, felt the rough, unfinished metal under her fingers. "He never got to finish this one," she said. Ellen smiled, soft and a little sad. "Then maybe you should." Rachel set it back down gently on the bench, and for the first time in 5 months, she let herself cry, not from grief alone anymore, but from something more complicated and more whole. The particular, quiet relief of finally being believed. Thank you so much for staying with Rachel all the way to the end of this one. Stories like hers are exactly why this channel exists, not for the twists alone, but for that hard-won moment when the truth finally gets to stand in the light where it belongs. If this one moved you, I'd love to hear which part hit hardest down in the comments. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe to Calm Stories Drama, because there's another story waiting for you right now, about a woman who finds a letter in her mother's attic that changes everything she thought she knew about her family. After everything Rachel just went through, I think you're going to want to see where that truth leads to.